So, it's probably bad practice to make a 10 to 20 minute YouTube video when you're fully aware that this is a question that you can answer fairly easily with 1 or 2 sentences, but I feel like there's a well of things that can be discussed here that you wouldn't get from simply those 1 or 2 sentences. For those of you who don't know, Miraculous Ladybug, Tales of Ladybug and Chat Noir is a French CGI cartoon created by Thomas Destruct about the lives of Marinette, dupain-cheng, and Adrien Agreste, as they juggle their schoolwork and interpersonal relationships, as well as being superheroes. Though, saying that Adrien gets a lot of that characterization is quite generous. More on that in a bit. The show is on its 4th season, it has a few movies planned, including a live-action production, and it has gotten quite popular online with older teens and adults, mostly for its love square, which comprises the characters' dynamics and different identities as they go through the same bullshit they always do, but this time they're wearing spandex. With all that said and done, and the underlying salt of it all, you might think I dislike this show. I really don't. It's cute, it's fun, I've watched at least 3 seasons of it. I spent time researching it, and the action scenes are just to die for. However, the writing, God, the writing. Like, I know the writing for 5 to 7-year-olds, and not for me personally, but 5 to 7-year-olds deserve better. And I think that every piece of media would be just a little bit better if I was allowed to have some input on the writing process. With that said, that's what I'm doing now. The story should focus primarily on Adrien, not because I dislike Marinette, but because he has the strongest relationship to the central plot. Remember before, when I gave that cute little summary about the series and said that it was about the lives of both Marinette and Adrien? That was kind of a lie. If you're familiar with the show, you're probably aware that Marinette is something closer to the main protagonist than the two ever get to sharing the role, as we follow Marinette throughout her day-to-day life, and Adrien is just there, which becomes more damning when the world around us is filtered through her lens in specific. For example, the audience's perception of Chloe Bourgeois. We're introduced to her first, not as Adrien's childhood friend that he has grown somewhat estranged from, but still really cares about, but as Marinette's bully. And the narrative reinforces that as Chloe's cruelty leads to the kumazation of most, if not every student in the class, many adults, and is one of the few characters to have been akumatized more than once. Now, I want to go back to that idea of how Chloe relates to Adrien, as she's usually propped up as a romantic rival to Marinette, as she's the one with the benefit of history, but just think about how interesting it could be if Adrien and Chloe actually acted like old friends. Like, in-jokes and knowing how to calm each other down and recognizing the other's feelings when no one else can. Just imagine that Adrien makes it known to Chloe that he hates how she's been acting and hates how she treats people. But even though he knows that he'd be better off pretending that they were never even friends to begin with, he can't let go because she reminds him of better times and has this idea that maybe, just maybe, if he was able to strengthen this bond, things could go back to the way they used to be. Things could be better. But no, Thomas Destruct hates Chloe, so naturally there's no hope for any kind of narrative like that whatsoever. So that's that on that. It's kind of hard to tell where Marinette stands in his eyes, so to speak, as she is both the narrative's whipping girl and that anytime the story needs to punish a character, it's going to be her, but he has also said that Marinette was designed to look like the child of his and his ex-girlfriend, and I feel like we need a different space to address all of whatever that is, so we're just going to move on. Even when she is forced to take the lumps in the story, on some level, the world is seen mostly through her eyes, as episodes focus on her relationships with other people, and her romantic interest in Adrien, and all of that would be fine if it was more interesting, but this is Miraculous Ladybug, and we are going to spin our wheels over this for as long as it's possible. She's a fine protagonist for what it's worth. It's not like I dislike her, but I just feel like there'd be more to the story if we focused on Adrien. I mean, back in the good old days of the 2D PV, it made perfect sense that Marinette, or as this version of her is called by the fandom, Brigitte, was the focal point character because from what we saw of the PV, Felix, the fan name for this version of Adrien, was something more of a tuxedo mask to Brigette's Sailor Moon. He aids in battle and has a fun dynamic with her outside of costume, but beyond that we don't have to learn that much about him because not only is the pretense no longer there of him being on equal footing with her, but there are far fewer hints that he's supposed to be more complex than what he is shown to be. He's her love interest. He's a pretty moody boy, and that's all he's supposed to be. He's so deep and brooding. I shouldn't joke. However, things have clearly changed since then. What we get with Marinette is that she's your average, if not a little bit above average, girl who lives an average life with good friends and a loving family who gets this extraordinary ability and the chance to make the world a better place. And that's great! Love me some of that classic magical girl goodness of love and friendship and hope being the thing that saves the world itself. Nothing better than the basics. We love that in this house. However, in contrast, Adrien is anything but ordinary. The son of a cold and unforgiving fashion mogul who is savoring his first taste of freedom and both being allowed to go to school for the first time and getting these extraordinary abilities, only to have to turn around and fight against his own father, who Adrien still believes loves him despite everything that he's been put through. Take a look at the Season 2 episode Gorizilla, one of my favorite episodes of the series that primarily focuses on Adrien. It has this thing where, as Gabriel Agreste begins to suspect Adrien as Chat Noir, and how despite his evil tendencies and his desire to get his hands on the Miraculous, he won't put it before the safety and well-being of his son.
If you don't transform soon, you might wind up like a gooey pile of camembert.
I can't, Flag. Not in the open like this.
If indeed you are Cat Noir, then transform, son. Please. Come on, son.
Cat Noir! Help!
Drop Ladybug!
Gabriel Agreste isn't supposed to be sympathetic. Not even a little. But, given that he wants to use the Miraculous to revive his dead wife, it would show a character consistency of putting his family and those he cares about before the world itself. A situation that causes him to mistake the forest for the trees, so to speak, as his efforts to bring back one family member causes him to neglect and abuse another. This opens him up to a great amount of complexity and makes itself remarkably compelling compared to what we would see later in the series. I can't guarantee that the series with Adrien, even merely as a more major focus, wouldn't move faster than a glacier can melt at the rate these writers go, but by throwing in this dynamic into the story, it might become something more of a slow burn than a crawl, as Adrien comes to realize that he lives within the walls of this house, but he is not home. As Gabriel can't be quite sure if Adrien, his Adrien, would have the gall to do something like that, to disobey him so flagrantly. But does he even really know his Adrien? Any Adrien? Discussions over dinner as Gabriel says, "I'm sure Hawkmoth is only doing what he thinks is right for the city, despite it all." And Adrien has to say, "I'm sure Chat Noir thinks he's doing the same thing." The subtle distrust that lingers between them as Gabriel has to wonder since when has Adrien worn a ring? And other things he doesn't really know about his dear, sweet son, and how far their bond has truly been severed in all of this. Just, his father is the main villain of the series and we're focusing on Marinette making a hat?
Are you sure?
Imagine if the entirety of Gravity Falls was focused practically entirely on Wendy, with the exception of like 5 minutes of the episode focusing on the Pine twins. Like, yeah, she's cool and cute and she kicks some serious ass, but still like she has any reason to care about Ford. He's just some dude to her. I don't think they've even talked once. The comparison is not the smoothest, but you get what I'm saying. I don't even dislike Marinette as a character or as a protagonist. I feel like I have to keep restating that because views of her fluctuate so extremely, but I feel like the narrative would be more streamlined if Adrien and Marinette got equal focus. The show constantly tells us that Ladybug and Chat Noir are a team, that one couldn't really exist without the other, much less save Paris, and although the execution isn't really the case as Chat Noir is often simply treated like a damage sponge, it's there in the text. And the show itself should carry that same philosophy, that of equity and equality between its two leads. I understand that with 4, 5, 6 seasons greenlit, a bunch of travel specials in the works, and a live-action movie on its way, that having those calculating discussions over dinner might be moving the plot a little too fast for the crew's taste. But as is, the series feels like it's in a state of rot. I'm not saying that Adrien being the protagonist would make the series better, but I am thinking that it would help, and help solve a lot of other strange factors in the series. But I feel like that's a video for another day if I want to talk about anything with the true complexity it deserves. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope above all else, it made sense. Miraculous Ladybug is hard for me to talk about, not because of any especially strong personal attachments or anything like that, but because I'm so aware of how the web of strings tangle when I talk about the things that I like about the show combined with everything that I don't have with other shows. For instance, I like Kagami. I like the sword lesbian. But by acknowledging that I like her, I have to acknowledge that she's a shallow character that only exists to be a love rival for Marinette, as well as the fact that her personality is particularly stereotypical for an Asian character, to be stoic and quiet and worry about her family's honor and all that. Which gets me to thinking about how, despite the fact that Marinette is half Chinese, that she isn't designed like any other Asian character within the series, which gets me thinking about how much I prefer Marinette's old design and wondering about what the hell happened to so many good elements in the PV and even after the PV, and how good the animation used to be before the show began airing, and now I'm in a bad mood and this all happened just because I wanted to make sword lesbian jokes. Needless to say, I don't think this will be the last time I'm dipping into the Miraculous Ladybug discourse, but not to worry, I also have a few Supernatural video scripts in the work as we speak. I don't want to be limited in what I do here because the last thing I want for this is to not be fun anymore, but the best way to do that is just to make videos on whatever trips my fancy. This was originally supposed to be a video on Carmen Sandiego, and now I'm just dying to talk about Kakegurui with anybody who is willing to listen, so who knows what to expect for the next time. So feel free to subscribe. There'll be more opportunities to come from me to continue to spew random bullshit.